I lost $194,000 in less than 48 hours because my cousin Kate walked into a local bank branch with a forged power of attorney and cleaned out my business operating account. Writing this on a fresh account because my sister knows my main. Everything else stays. My name is Tyler, I am 34, and I run a custom cabinetry shop in Columbus, Ohio. If you love stories about toxic family members getting exactly what they legally deserve, make sure to subscribe right now. To understand how my cousin Kate thought he could get away with stealing $194,000 from my shop, you have to understand how our family money. My grandfather, Frank, started a small lumber yard back in the late 1960s. He was a hard man, but he was fair. He believed in sweat equity. He had 2 kids, my dad and my uncle Marcus. My dad inherited the blue-collar work ethic. He spent his life working with his hands. Uncle Marcus, on the other hand, inherited my grandfather's charm but none of his discipline. Uncle Marcus became a real estate agent who specialized in high-end suburban properties, drove leased BMWs he could barely afford, and raised his son, Kade, to believe that appearance was everything. I grew up in my dad's small workshop behind our house. While Kade was playing junior varsity golf and wearing Abercrombie & Fitch clothes, I was learning how to square a piece of walnut and calibrate a table saw. I loved the smell of sawdust. I loved the precision of joinery. When I turned 22, I officially launched my own business, Vanguard Woodworks. I dropped the corporate name later and just called it Tyler's Custom Cabinetry. It was a brutal grind. For the first 4 years, I lived on cheap ramen and Trader Joe's frozen meals. I slept on a cot in the back of my commercial unit more times than I care to admit. Kade looked down on me the entire time. Every Christmas Eve at my grandparents' house, Kade would make passive-aggressive comments. He would look at my calloused hands and ask if I was ever going to get a real corporate job. He would talk loudly about his new Michael Kors watch or his trips to Hilton Head. Uncle Marcus would smile proudly, sipping his expensive scotch, while my dad just sat in the corner, quietly drinking a domestic beer, knowing that I was building something real. By the time I hit 30, the grind paid off. The housing market in central Ohio was booming. High-end builders started noticing my work. I was not just building kitchen cabinets anymore. I was designing custom libraries, hidden wine cellars, and integrated architectural millwork for homes worth millions. My crew grew from just me and a part-time apprentice to 6 full-time master carpenters. We moved into a 5,000 square foot facility. Our gross revenue crossed the $1 million mark. That was when the family dynamic shifted. Suddenly, Kade was not so condescending anymore. He started showing up at my shop unannounced. He would walk through the bay doors, looking at our state-of-the-art European edge banders and our massive CNC routers. He started hinting that he wanted to come on board as a marketing director or a partner. He told me that with his sales background, he could scale my business to $10 million. I told him no. I told him politely, but firmly. I did not need a marketing director who spent more time updating his Instagram than actually closing deals. Kade did not take the rejection well. His face flushed, and he muttered something about how I forgot where I came from. The real trouble started when my grandfather Frank's health began to fail. He developed severe dementia and had to be placed in an upscale assisted living facility. The monthly cost was staggering, nearly $9,000. Because my dad is a quiet craftsman and Uncle Marcus is a smooth talker, the family decided years ago that Uncle Marcus would handle Grandfather Frank's personal finances. What nobody realized was that Uncle Marcus's real estate business was secretly collapsing. The suburban luxury market had slowed down, and his lavish lifestyle had caught up with him. 6 months ago, Grandfather Frank passed away. The funeral was a somber affair, but the tension in the room during the post-funeral gathering at a local restaurant was palpable. Kade and Uncle Marcus were whispering in the corner, looking at me with a strange mix of resentment and triumph. I did not understand why at the time. I was just grieving my grandfather. 2 weeks after the funeral, I woke up at 5 in the morning to check my business accounts. I always check them before the crew arrives at 6. I logged into our commercial banking portal. I looked at the balance. My heart stopped. The balance on our primary operating account was $412. 2 days prior, that balance had been $194,412. I rubbed my eyes. I thought it was a technical glitch. I refreshed the page. The number did not change. $412. I clicked on the transaction history. There it was. A single, massive outgoing wire transfer for exactly $194,000. The recipient account was a corporate entity called Vanguard Holdings LLC. My stomach dropped. My business name was Vanguard Woodworks before I rebranded, but I still maintained the old legal entity name for banking purposes. Someone had created a fake LLC with an almost identical name to trick the bank, and they had successfully transferred nearly my entire operating capital. I did not panic. When you spend a decade running a business, you learn that panic is a luxury you cannot afford. I immediately called my commercial account manager, a woman named Sarah who had handled my business for 5 years. Because it was 5:30 in the morning, I had to wait until the branch opened at 8. Those 2.5 hours were the longest of my life. I paced the floor of my shop, looking at my machines, thinking about my 6 employees whose payroll was due in exactly 4 days. That $194,000 was not just profit. It was our survival. It was earmarked for a massive lumber order from a specialized supplier in Pennsylvania, and it was the buffer for our quarterly taxes. At exactly 8 o'clock, Sarah called me back. Her voice sounded incredibly tense. She told me to come down to the main branch immediately. She said she had the documentation for the wire transfer in front of her. When I arrived at the bank, Sarah escorted me into a private conference room. She handed me a manila folder. Inside was a copy of the wire authorization form. It had been executed in person at a branch located 30 miles away, in a wealthy suburb where Uncle Marcus lived. I looked at the signature line on the authorization form. It was signed by Kade. I looked at Sarah. I asked her how Kade could possibly sign a wire transfer for my business account. He was never an authorized signer. He had absolutely nothing to do with my company. Sarah pulled out the second document in the folder. It was a durable power of attorney. The document stated that my grandfather, Frank, was the majority shareholder and founding partner of Vanguard Woodworks, and that due to his medical incapacitation, he was granting full financial power of attorney to his grandson, Kade. The document bore my grandfather's apparent signature, a notary stamp, and a date from 14 months prior. I stared at the paper. I almost laughed, despite the absolute horror of the situation. My grandfather Frank had absolutely nothing to do with my custom cabinetry business. He had started a completely separate lumber yard decades ago, which he had sold off when he retired in the late 90s. He had never owned a single share of my company. I started my business from scratch with $3,000 of my own savings and a used pickup truck. Kade had gone to a bank branch where the tellers did not know our specific business history. He had presented a beautifully forged power of attorney, exploiting the fact that my grandfather's name was Frank and my business had originally used the word Vanguard. The teller, seeing a legal-looking document with a notary stamp and a young man in a sharp suit claiming to handle his dying grandfather's corporate affairs, had authorized the wire transfer without calling me. It was a catastrophic banking error, but more importantly, it was a calculated, deliberate act of family betrayal. I asked Sarah for copies of everything. She gave them to me, her hands shaking slightly. She knew the bank was facing massive liability for allowing this to happen. She assured me that their corporate fraud division was already launching an internal investigation. I left the bank and sat in my truck. My phone rang. It was my dad. His voice was trembling. He told me that Uncle Marcus had just called him. Uncle Marcus had boasted that Kade had finally secured his inheritance from grandfather's hidden assets. Uncle Marcus told my dad that I had been hiding grandfather's money in my business accounts for years, and that Kade had simply taken back what belonged to their side of the family. The delusion was staggering. They had convinced themselves that my hard-earned business revenue was actually a secret trust fund left behind by my grandfather. They used that lie to justify absolute theft. I told my dad the truth. I told him that Kade had just stolen $194,000 of my operating capital, and that payroll was due on Friday. My dad was silent for a long moment. Then, he said, "Tyler, do whatever you have to do. Do not spare them." My first instinct was to file a police report immediately and have Kade arrested for grand larceny and forgery. But I knew how the criminal justice system worked. It would take months, maybe years, for a trial to happen. The money would be frozen or spent. Kade would declare bankruptcy, and I would never see a single dime of that $194,000. My business would collapse in the meantime. I needed a proactive, legal countermove that would give me absolute leverage over Kade and Uncle Marcus immediately. I called my corporate attorney, a sharp, brilliant woman named Elena. I explained the situation. Elena told me that while the bank's fraud division was investigating, we should simultaneously look into Kade's assets to see where the money might have gone. 2 hours later, Elena called me back with a massive breakthrough. She had run a comprehensive asset and public records search on Kade. It turned out that Kade was in severe financial distress. 2 years ago, Kade had purchased a sprawling, $400,000 suburban home in an upscale neighborhood. To fund it, he had taken out a massive primary mortgage and a secondary home equity line of credit, commonly known as a HELOC. Because Kade's luxury real estate lifestyle was a complete sham, he had defaulted on both the primary mortgage and the HELOC. The local private lending firm that held the secondary note on his house was actively preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings. The outstanding balance on that defaulted secondary note, including accrued interest and legal fees, was exactly $82,500. A wicked, perfectly legal idea began to form in my mind. I asked Elena if that defaulted note was sellable on the secondary market. She told me that private lenders sell defaulted paper all the time just to get cash off their books. I told Elena to contact the lender immediately. I told her I wanted to buy Kade's defaulted mortgage note. Because my business banking account was wiped out, I could not use company funds. But, over the last 5 years, I had been quietly investing my personal savings into low-risk mutual funds. I called my personal financial advisor. I liquidated $82,500 of my personal portfolio. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Elena had finalized the paperwork. I was no longer just Kade's cousin. I was his primary secured creditor. I owned the debt on the roof over his head. The next day, the bank's corporate fraud department reached out to me. They confirmed that the power of attorney Kade used was a blatant forgery. The notary stamp belonged to a woman who had reported her notary seal stolen 6 months prior. The bank acknowledged their error. They informed me that they were reversing the wire transfer and restoring the $194,000 to my account under their corporate fraud insurance policy. The money would be fully restored by Thursday morning. My business was saved. My payroll would clear. But I was not done with Kade. Not by a long shot. The timing of this entire situation was perfect for a public reckoning. Every year, our extended family hosts a massive Father's Day cookout at Uncle Marcus's lakeside cabin. It was scheduled for that upcoming Saturday. I knew Kade and Uncle Marcus would be there, acting like kings, believing they had successfully stolen my money and that I was too weak or too embarrassed to do anything about it. I instructed Elena to prepare the formal legal paperwork. Since I now own Kade's defaulted secondary mortgage note, and he was more than 90 days delinquent, I had the immediate legal right under Ohio law to accelerate the debt and demand full payment, or begin immediate foreclosure. I had Elena draw up a formal demand letter and a notice of foreclosure filing. On Saturday afternoon, my dad and I drove up to the lakeside cabin. When we walked into the backyard, the atmosphere changed instantly. Uncle Marcus was standing by a high-end stainless steel grill, wearing a polo shirt and holding a drink. Kade was sitting on a patio chair, laughing with some cousins. He was wearing a brand new, shiny gold watch. I recognized it immediately. It was a luxury brand. He had clearly used a portion of what he thought was his stolen bounty to buy it. When Kade saw me, a smug, arrogant smile spread across his face. He stood up, swirling his drink. "Tyler," Kade said loudly, making sure the entire family could hear him. "Glad you could make it. I heard your little cabinet shop is going through some cash flow issues. If you need a loan, you just have to ask. Family helps family, right?" Uncle Marcus chuckled from the grill. A few aunts looked uncomfortable. They clearly knew something was going on, but they did not know the details. I walked straight up to Kade. I did not raise my voice. I kept my tone completely flat, conversational, and dry. "I don't need a loan, Kade," I said. "The bank actually cleared up that little transaction issue. The $194,000 you stole using a forged power of attorney has been fully restored to my account. The bank's corporate security team has already handed the forgery evidence over to the state prosecutor's office. So, you might want to enjoy that new watch while you can." The smile instantly vanished from Kade's face. He turned a pale, sickly shade of white. Uncle Marcus stopped flipping his burgers and stepped away from the grill. "What the hell are you talking about, Tyler?" Uncle Marcus demanded, walking over. "That was your grandfather's money. He left it for Kade. You were hoarding it." "Grandfather Frank didn't own a single nail in my shop, Marcus," I said, dropping the title of uncle completely. "Kade forged a legal document. That is a federal bank felony. But, honestly, I'm not here to talk about the criminal charges. That's between Kade and the state of Ohio." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope. I dropped it onto the patio table right in front of Kade's drink. "What is that?" Kade stammered, his voice cracking. "That," I said, "is a formal notice of foreclosure. You see, Kade, when I found out you stole my operating capital, I did a little digging into your finances. I noticed you were defaulting on your secondary mortgage note. The lender was more than happy to sell that note to me for $82,500. I am now your lien holder." The backyard went completely dead silent. My aunts, uncles, and cousins all stopped talking. Everyone was staring at us. "You can't do that," Uncle Marcus shouted, his face turning bright red. "That's his home. That's family." "Family doesn't forge power of attorney documents to wipe out a cousin's business accounts," I replied smoothly. "According to the terms of that note, which I now own, I am accelerating the entire debt due to your material default. You have exactly 30 days to pay me the full balance of $82,500 plus legal fees. If you don't, the foreclosure paperwork has already been stamped by the county clerk. I will take ownership of your house, put it on the market, and evict you." Kade stared at the documents inside the envelope. His hands were shaking so violently he almost knocked his drink over. He looked up at his father, utterly terrified. He knew, and Uncle Marcus knew, that they did not have $82,000. Their luxury lifestyle was a house of cards, and I had just pulled out the bottom card. "Tyler, please," Uncle Marcus said, his voice suddenly losing all of its arrogant bluster. He sounded desperate now. "We can talk about this. Let's not involve the courts. Let's handle this as a family." "We are handling it as a family," I said, looking Kade dead in the eye. "I'm giving you 30 days. That's more mercy than you showed my 6 employees when you tried to destroy their livelihoods for a gold watch." My dad stood right next to me, arms crossed, nodding silently. He didn't say a single word, but the look of absolute pride on his face was worth every single hour of overtime I had ever worked. We turned around and walked out of the cookout. Nobody tried to stop us. The aftermath was glorious in its legal precision. Kade tried desperately to secure a personal loan to pay me off, but his credit score was completely trashed from his previous defaults. Uncle Marcus tried to borrow money from other family members, but once the story of the $194,000 bank forgery got out, every single aunt and uncle shut their doors in his face. Nobody wanted to assist a thief. Exactly 31 days later, Kade failed to produce the funds. Elena proceeded with the legal foreclosure execution. Because Kade did not want a public, sheriff-led eviction ruining what little social status he had left in his suburban neighborhood, he signed a deed in lieu of foreclosure over to my legal entity. He packed his bags, packed up his Michael Kors watches, and moved into a cramped 2-bedroom rental apartment on the bad side of town. I took possession of the property. The housing market was still strong, so I hired a local crew to do some minor cosmetic updates, listed the house, and sold it 3 weeks later for $440,000. After paying off the primary mortgage holder and covering all legal fees, I walked away with a clean, lawful profit of $91,000. Kade is currently serving a term of probation and community service after pleading guilty to a reduced charge of financial document forgery, a resolution his public defender scrambled to secure because I chose not to pursue civil damages since I already owned his house. Uncle Marcus's real estate license was suspended shortly after due to an unrelated ethics investigation regarding his escrow accounts. My cabinetry shop is doing better than ever. We just landed a contract for a 30-unit luxury condo development downtown. My dad now works with me part-time, mostly just hanging out in the shop, teaching the young apprentices how to square a piece of walnut. Sitting in my newly renovated office today, looking at a thriving business that my family tried to destroy, I realize that true satisfaction isn't about shouting or revenge. It is about knowing the law, keeping your mouth shut, and letting an arrogant relative hand you the keys to their own downfall. Speaking of relatives who think they are financial geniuses, it reminds me of the time my sister tried to claim our grandmother's entire jewelry collection by staging a fake burglary at the estate sale.